Chapter 1. By the end of this chapter, students will be able to
define addiction as a brain disorder, understand the cycle of addiction, and recognize signs of addiction. Today we're going to be talking about substance use and addiction. Everyone is impacted by addiction differently, and some of us may have a different understanding of what addiction means. This chapter will overview the science of addiction in the brain. In these videos, we will be reviewing some of the harder topics or more commonly misunderstood areas as it pertains to substance use. Before we dive into this chapter, we created an activity to start called Silent Graffiti. Students can take the next 5 minutes to graffiti their ideas around the topic of addiction. Encourage youth to use words, phrases, song lyrics, pictures, or symbols, anything that represents the meaning of addiction for them. This activity is a great outlet for students to practice self-expression. However, the art that they create may include details that the youth may feel are more personal. It's within your discretion to make the space for youth to share their work. The science of addiction can be complicated to understand, but its comprehension is crucial to understand in order to navigate these topics with youth. Addiction is defined as a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive substance or behavior seeking and use, despite any of the adverse consequences. Addiction is a brain disorder. Using substances causes functional changes with brain circuits responsible for pleasure responses, stress, and self-control. Every individual's risk for addiction is unique to them and depends on a multitude of different factors, including biological, environmental, and psychological influences. Brain changes caused by substance use may last a long time, even after a person has stopped using substances. Addiction is a lot like other diseases, such as heart disease. Both disrupt the normal, healthy functioning of an organ in the body, both have serious harmful effects, and both are, in many cases, preventable and treatable. If left untreated, they can last a lifetime and may lead to death. Before we dive deeper into the different impacts that living with addiction can have, let's first discuss why addiction occurs in the body in the first place. When we were all born, there was no how-to guide when it came to navigating the world. What was good for you, what was bad. In order for us as infants to better understand our environment, we had to take risks in order to explore and learn new information. As a means of reinforcing beneficial behaviors, the brain is conditioned to trigger feelings of pleasure, also known as dopamine, throughout the body. Think of that happy feeling you get when you eat lunch or finish a workout. Once our body receives that feeling of pleasure or reward, we'll continue to seek out that activity or behavior that caused that. Dopamine is central to this feeling of pleasure. Whenever the reward circuit is activated, a burst of dopamine signals that something important is happening that needs to be remembered. This dopamine signal causes changes in neural connectivity that make it easier to repeat the activity again and again without even thinking about it, which leads to the formation of habits. Our brains are wired to increase the odds that we'll repeat pleasurable activities, but when the substance use gets involved, it can hijack the whole system. Just as drugs produce intense euphoria, they also produce much larger surges of synthetic or fake dopamine. These large surges of dopamine teach the brain to seek drugs at the expense of other healthier goals and activities. Over time, our brain becomes so used to the fake dopamine from the substance that it produces less dopamine naturally. This leads to less of an effect on our reward system. A person will continue to use drugs in order to restore the dopamine levels and feel that same euphoric feeling again. Due to tolerance, our body and our brain will require a larger amount of the substance to feel that same high, which is how addiction begins.
The difference between normal rewards and drug rewards can be compared to someone whispering into your ear and someone shouting into a microphone. This chart shows how much dopamine is released in the brain when we are doing various activities. For example, enjoying food boosts our dopamine levels by 50%. For a person who is using drugs, the brain adjusts to the synthetic influx by reducing the natural dopamine produced, which is akin to turning the volume down. As a result, the person's ability to experience pleasure from a naturally rewarding activity like eating is also reduced. Though initial use is the first step, it will not always result in substance use disorder. People with substance use disorder did not intend to become addicted. Misuse begins when a person is using a substance in a recurring, improper, or harmful way. Tolerance then occurs when the original dosage of a substance is no longer producing the same effect, and more of the drug is needed. Eventually, our brain becomes dependent on the substance to function, which often leads to a person developing a substance use disorder. A recurrence or relapse may occur when a person is experiencing withdrawal and seeks the substance out again. A recurrence is one part of recovering from substance use dependence. This may happen when a person stops maintaining their goal of reducing or avoiding use and returns to their previous levels of use. Prescription drugs can be extremely beneficial for a person when used for its intended purpose. Misuse of prescription drugs occurs when someone is using a medication not as intended or not as prescribed. For example, taking too much of a medication prescribed to you in order to get high, or taking someone else's prescription. 3 commonly misused medication types are opioids, depressants, and stimulants. Polysubstance use occurs when 2 or more types of substances are taken together, either intentionally or unintentionally. Here is an exit ticket for students to reflect on what was learned. Our brain creates dopamine, a feel-good chemical that releases when we give ourselves a reward or pleasure. Over time, what happens to the dopamine in our brain when we use substances?